The Arbinger Institute, we work primarily with organizational and individual mindset. And we'll explain a little bit about what that means in a moment. But if I could just get another show of hands, those of you that have read any of the Arbinger Institute's books, Leadership and Self-Deception, by show of hands. All right, it's quite a few of you. Have any of you read The Outward Mindset? Okay. And then the one that the fewest people in the organizational space read is called The Anatomy of Peace. Anybody read that? All right, right over here. Sometimes people will ask which book to read first, and we just say yes. Just dive in. Leadership and Self-Deception, no question, has been probably the most profound and impactful book of the three. Outward Mindset is really taking the principles that are explained and explored in Leadership and Self-Deception and helping you see the application in an organizational setting. So today we're going to be talking about a few of the principles that are explored in Leadership and Self-Deception. We hope that your curiosity is piqued. We hope that you see the profound impact that our mindset actually makes on things. I oftentimes, when I come to a conference or a summit or something along these lines, will usually try to not be there before I speak, because I have a bad habit, and I mentioned this to Andrew and Ken earlier, I have a bad habit of changing my presentation constantly. And I think probably I found myself shifting about 15 or 20 things over the course of hearing the things you were discussing this morning. I think this whole concept of true group dentistry versus corporate dentistry, I think you've got that. I think that's there. That's incredibly powerful. It's not just about the methodical approach toward administration systems and processes, but it's the very way that we see ourselves, our roles, who we are as individuals and people around us. And I think that's really what makes the difference between the corporate side and the group side. So I admire this organization. It's wonderful to be here and be part of it. This is what we're going to do today. In thinking about some of the things that you're dealing with, I imagine none of you, when you went into dentistry, into the profession, decided you sat down and you thought, you know what, I'd like to someday deal with employee problems. You know what I'd really like to do? I'd like to deal with a lot of turnover. That would be fun. You know what would be great is if we could just deal with customers and patients just don't really understand reality and expect things that aren't possible. That's what I'd like to deal with. Patients that want us to present as well as if they're the only person in the entire world. I don't think any of you, when you started off, sat down and thought it'd be wonderful to deal with a group of people where the morale is probably winding down, there's intrigue and political stuff going on in an office or in an environment. I don't think that's the goal or the intention with any of these things. Yet, of course, if you're normal, if your office is peopled by people, you're running into some of these things. At there, he's talking about the dynamic tension that can exist within a team, but the fact that there is a necessary dynamic tension that needs to exist. Sometimes teams think that the secret is to avoid disagreement and conflict, whereas the most successful and transformative teams are the ones that learn how to leverage disagreement and conflict. Learning how to disagree productively is one of the most powerful things that an organization can ever learn to do. Sometimes we worship at this altar of consensus and peace. And usually that means stifling particular ideas or notions or not bringing them up because they might disagree with something else. But learning how to disagree productively is an incredibly powerful thing. We're going to take a look at that today. You've got some booklets sitting in front of you. We're going to dive into some of the things that are in there. Now, there's going to be a lot of stuff in that booklet that we're not going to deal with. We're going to take about 90 minutes or so here. And our goal is to give you something both intellectually stimulating, diving into some philosophical principles that will literally change the way that we see things, but at the same time allow you to leave with some practical tools that you can go back and start doing things a little bit differently. Okay, so that's quite a lofty goal, and we're gonna try to achieve that in about 90 minutes. All right. Now, in order to set this up, it's important that we first explore this idea of why mindset even matters. Why we're talking about mindset to begin with. Assume for a moment that you're all farmers. As a farmer, the success of your farm is predicated on the quality of your harvest. If I have a great harvest, I'm going to be able to take that to market. I'm going to be able to sell, make some money, and survive another year. Fair to say? The harvest is key. Because that harvest is so absolutely critical, I'm going to go out and spend a lot of time and energy, money, resources on finding and procuring the best seeds money can buy. I'm going to talk to other farms. I'm going to go to some trade shows. I'm going to have conversations. I might do a little bit of testing here and there. But I will spare no expense to bring the best seeds as possible back to my farm. Now, as I bring those seeds back to my farm, having spent a lot of time, energy, and money on these seeds, what else is there at my farm that I have some control over that ultimately will determine the quality of the harvest besides the seed? Soil. So what would happen if I brought back some fantastic seeds and I planted them in toxic soil? What would happen? Nothing good come of that, right? Now I want you to think for just a moment about this metaphor. I want you to think of the seeds as processes, systems, skills, behaviors. You cannot have a productive farm without seeds. You have got to have methodical administrative processes, procedures, and the best ones that money can buy. You've got to bring in great skills and behavioral systems and such to deal with the realities of the organizational demands that you're experiencing on a regular basis. But if I'm bringing these seeds back into my own practice and I'm planting them in less than fertile soil, not much is going to come from that. The scary thing is that what I'll often do is blame the seed. Well, this administrative procedure they've given me, or this process, oh, it might have worked great somewhere else, but it's not good for us. We find ways to blame the seed without ever questioning our own soil. Sometimes we neglect to even think about the quality of the soil as we're planting these seeds. Sometimes when you have an organization, it gives you some wonderful best practice seeds that have worked and had great success in other areas. I might bring those back and then try to plant them. And if they fail to give me any kind of a yield, my default will be to blame the seed without giving a lot of thought to the soil into which it's planted. Our mindset is the soil. Our mindset is the way that we see things. It's the way that we see ourselves. It's the way that we see others. It's the way that we see our obligations one to another. It's the way people are experiencing me, the way that people are seeing me, the way that I'm seeing them. This mindset world, which is different than the behavioral world, mindset is what drives behavior. Behavior is what drives results. Oftentimes, the very way that we see the problem is the problem. Just think about this for a moment. If I see an individual as a friend, there are a finite number of behaviors that naturally occur to me to do. Things that I might think about, they naturally occur. They're a friend. There's a lot of different behaviors. If I see somebody as an enemy, there are an entirely different set of behaviors that will naturally flow from that mindset or the way that I would see that individual. Now, there's plenty of overlap. There are behaviors that I would do both with a friend as well as with an enemy. But the very mindset that I have determines the way that that behavior lands on that individual. The mindset is an incredibly powerful thing, but we spend more time on transitioning or manipulating or changing our behaviors. And when we're trying to manipulate our own behaviors and change behaviors or skills or things along those lines without taking into account the underlying mindset, we're leaving something behind that can have a massive impact on the success of our organization. In fact, McKinsey and Company, in a study, this is a few years ago, stated that organizations that identify and address pervasive mindsets at the outset are 4 times more likely to succeed in organizational change efforts than are companies that overlook this stage. It's saying the organizations that pause and consider before they're planting seeds, or even as those seeds are being planted, the ones that pause and consider the quality of the soil into which they're being planted, That's quite a percentage growth. 4 times, 400% more likely to succeed in organizational change efforts. When we're talking about silver to black ribbons, we're talking about growth, we're talking about attentiveness to our customers, to our patients. If we're neglecting to focus on our mindset, the mindset of the people that we work with, as well as the mindset of those that we serve and that we work with, we're setting aside something that could contribute to our success by 400%. That's not just careless, that's irresponsible. It's actually counterproductive. That's why we're going to talk a little bit about mindset, something very powerful. Now, in order to do this, what we're going to try to accomplish today is cover 2 self-awareness tools. These are tools to help us begin to see things a little bit more clearly. I love the fact that you started off with gratitude. It's interesting. Maybe a generation ago in a lot of organizations, that very feel of expressing gratitude in a corporate setting feels soft, feels emotional. All right, let's get on with the real organizational stuff. The irony, it's the pausing and considering and expressing gratitude that helps us align ourselves with true reality, seeing things as they really are. And we actually gain clarity when we express gratitude. Life is full of good as well as bad, but very often it's so much easier to focus on the bad. And we pause, we recalibrate, we expand that vision of what reality is. We're in a far better position to deal with the problems and issues of the day when we're grateful. I just love that. That was fantastic. I was ready to share mine, by the way, and mine was going to simply be this. Thank you for holding this conference in Florida rather than Northeast Ohio. Calendar-wise, but we didn't get there. Anyway, all right. The first self-awareness tool is this. I want you to just consider for a moment that there are 2 ways to approach any challenge or opportunity. Ken talked a little bit about change management. He used the iPhone as a great example. Often in change management, the significant shift is doing the wrong things well and a willingness to shift to doing the right things poorly in order to get to where we do the right things well. And the reason why we continue to do the wrong things well is because we've become so proficient and good at executing that we pride ourselves on our perfect execution. We don't want to lose that. In order to start doing the right things well, we have to go through this phase of doing the right things poorly, and that sometimes is unacceptable. We just don't want to go there. Now, the reason we don't want to go there is because we have a particular need to continue to be operating, convince ourselves, and show the world that we can do the right things well. So sometimes we resist that change. So anytime we're looking at change is a great example. We can approach change from these 2 different ways. One is what we call an outward mindset, which is where we focus on the mission and the objective of our organization, of our team, of our group. The other is what we call an inward mindset, which is where we are primarily focused on self. I'm focused on my things, my headaches, my issues, constraints, how everything affects me. We'll sometimes refer to this as being in the box. You see, when I'm in the box, I don't see anybody else. I only see my stuff. I see my worries, my concerns, and I grade everything against my stuff. When I'm outward, I'm focused on the mission and objective of the team and the organization. Because of that, I see the people around me, because they too are supposedly focused on that, and I certainly want to take them into account in the way I go about doing my things. So at a very basic level, inward mindset is focused on self. Outward mindset is focused on the organization, the team, the group. Now, deeper dive into each of these. From an inward mindset, others don't matter like I matter. Sounds pretty basic. And I realize I don't think any of us would say, yeah, that's basically my management style. If somebody were to ask you, how have you achieved your success? I don't think any of us would say, well, I kind of start with the idea that others don't matter like I matter, and then I kind of go from there. It just kind of works out. Okay? I hope not. Maybe somebody would. So others don't matter like I matter. Okay? Now, because of that, all of my behaviors and my objectives are self-focused. I only take myself into account as I try to achieve things. Because of that, while others have needs, objectives, and challenges that I work with, I don't see them. I don't care about them. They're not important to me. The only time that I really even think about other individuals from an inward mindset is when they can help me or hurt me with my stuff. So when my mindset is inward, I'm focused on my objectives, my behaviors. The only time I think about other people is when they can help me or hurt me with my stuff. In fact, I sometimes will go through my organizational life, and home life for that matter, with a ledger in the back of my mind. Everybody falls into one of two categories: those that help me and make my life easier, and those that make my life more difficult. It's the only way that I see them, if I'm being honest with myself. I just wonder if we have a kind of an accompanying ledger of those whose lives we make easier and those whose lives we make more difficult. From an inward mindset, I see people as objects. I don't see them as people. They're things to be dealt with. They can either help me or hurt me. Or if they're none of the above, I don't really think too much about them. And so sometimes we define it this way. When they're objects, they might be vehicles that I use. Now, I've owned a couple businesses, a couple software businesses that I've sold off. They weren't huge, but I got to where around 30, 35 or so employees. I like to think that I was outward, but the reality of the fact is I saw every single individual that worked for me as a vehicle. Oh, sure, I took good care of my vehicles. We made sure we had wonderful parties, a lot of happiness, and all kinds of good stuff. But did I really understand what their headaches, issues, constraints, the challenges they're facing as they're trying to get their day done, the things that are having an impact on how they go about doing their job? No, but I sure made sure they all knew that they needed to be understanding of what mine were. I owned the company. So this isn't about getting along with other people. This isn't even about nice. This is about seeing clearly, seeing things as they really are. So when I see people as objects, I might see them as vehicles that I use, obstacles that I blame, or irrelevancies that I ignore. Vehicles that I use, these could be patients. Do we see the individual that's coming into our office as an individual to help us grow our business? Are we more focused on our solutions or their problems? Do we really understand the pressures, the worries, the concerns that they're experiencing? Or do we see any of those things coming out of their mouth as annoyances that I wish they'd stop talking about so we could get on and do the work? If we want to focus on retention of patients and increasing customer satisfaction and patient happiness, we start seeing them. The scary thing about this, when we're inward toward other individuals, we're constantly communicating this. Our mindset is constantly being communicated. Think about it for a moment. Have you ever been on the other side of an individual that's saying all the right things to you, smiling, saying nice things, and yet you know exactly how they feel about you? They want you to change. They want you to just fix yourself so that you'll make their lives easier. You feel the contempt. You feel kind of the demeaning way that they see you. Doesn't matter what they're saying. You know exactly the way that they see you, and it's communicated more loudly than anything else. Let's say for a moment that I'm going into some sort of a project, or I'm going into I've just hired on a new member of my staff, hygienist, assistant, some sort, office manager. They come into my office and we start off. Imagine if I started the relationship the following way. Good to have you part of the team. Let's dive in and get into a little bit of an orientation. Before we begin things, I want to make sure that you see that I understand that I see you as a vehicle here to enrich me and make me successful. And you're a tool for me to utilize. Anyway, let's go ahead and dive in, and here's the orientation. How well would that relationship go? Every conversation I have with that individual afterward, wouldn't it be filtered through that understanding? Oh, sure, at a certain point, there's a paycheck involved. They'll comply. They'll do certain things. What if we're already doing that? What if we're already communicating that on a constant basis with the people around us? It's a scary thought when you begin to pause and consider how quickly we are to notice other people's mindset toward us and how ignorant we are of how loudly ours is being communicated to others. We'll never see our own provocations, but we'll certainly see their reaction to our provocations. We'll see resistance. We'll see conflict. We'll see them maybe pushing back or talking behind our back to other associates or other individuals in the office. We'll see those things. But because we're in the box, we're failing to see our own provocation, and that it's all coming from the initial communication that we had and the ongoing communication that we continue to have. And so, of course, when things break down and we run into quote-unquote people problems, we usually say it's their fault. In fact, we've got a long list of evidences that confirm that to us. We've just completely failed to take into account our role in it. When we get frustrated toward people that we work with, we have a list of reasons. And you know what? Those lists, those things might actually be true. We're not suggesting that your list is incorrect. We're just suggesting it's incomplete. We're only seeing them in a certain way, and we're communicating that to them constantly. Now, there's another part. When we have an outward mindset toward others, we see them as people. When we see them as people, it means we see their needs, goals, and challenges. We're interested in those things because we recognize that the way that I go about doing my job, I can choose to take those into account or not. The people that I work with, our patients, our group relationships. I can choose to take their needs, their headaches, their issues and objectives into account, or I can choose not to. That's what's ultimately determining if I'm seeing people as people or as objects. Now here, again, others matter. Please keep in mind, we're not saying that they matter more than us, but we're also saying they don't matter less than us. This is not talking about organizational value. Somebody with 30 years experience in dentistry is more valuable to a practice than a summer intern coming in to help with some filing. That's not the problem. The problem is when I begin to believe that because of those 30 years in dental practice, that makes me more valuable as a human being and matter more as a human being. That's when we start crossing a line and we begin to communicate that to everybody that we're working with. Every staff meeting starts off with, welcome everybody, just remember I'm better than all of you and I matter quite a bit more. Anyway, let's dive in. Every patient relationship starts off with, good to see you in here, glad to have the dollars, or I'm sorry, the person in the bed here in the chair. Whether we think we're communicating that or not, if we're seeing individuals, that is being communicated. That has more to do with turnover than anything else. When we say mean things or demeaning things or have all kinds of other behavioral issues, those are simply a manifestation of the underlying mindset. They're not the problem, they're the symptom of the problem. When we have an inward mindset, we are focused primarily only on our results, my results, personally. When we have an outward mindset, we're focused on our results. And mine is part of ours. This isn't altruism. This isn't, I'm just going to make sure everybody else gets their stuff done and then eventually I'll get to mine. It's not it at all. I'm going to focus like a laser, get my job done, do the stuff that needs to be done. I'm simply going to take other people into account in the way that I do it so that I'm not solving one problem and creating 3 or 4 other problems, which I'll then blame everybody else for. When we have an outward mindset, we have sight, we have clarity. We see things as they really are, not as we want them to be or need them to be. We don't have a need for justification or validation. We don't have a need for people to defer and treat us in a particular way. We don't have all of these sensitivities that occur because we see people and we're taking them into account in the way we go about doing things. In fact, sometimes we can get in trouble when we even start thinking, all right, I want to be a great boss. I want to be a great leader. But when I'm thinking about myself as a great leader, who is it that I'm thinking about? Me. I'm not taking others into account. Sometimes we're more interested in being seen as a great leader than we are actually in being a great leader. Sometimes we're more interested in being seen as being helpful than we are in actually being helpful. Now, imagine for a moment, let's go back here. We take a look at this inward mindset. Imagine for a moment that I am communicating to somebody, I see you as an object. I see you as an obstacle in my life. What does that invite in others? Same thing, right? A little reciprocity. If you're feeling that judgment and contempt, you're going to find resistance coming from the other side. And again, of course, I'll never see my own role in it. I'll only see their reaction and blame them for any fallout or conflict that occurs from it. So if I'm communicating to somebody else that they're an object, I'm really giving them a wonderful invitation to quote-unquote go into the box toward me. I could be sowing these seeds all over the place. Every day you're handing out hundreds of invitations. They're either to go inward or to go outward. We just need to be aware of the invitations that we're extending. Last thing we want to do is create a situation like we're about to see here. This is what happens when somebody goes into the box and then invites somebody else to join them. We're going to see a little bit of a spiraling out of control here. This is from a TV show that used to be on years ago, Malcolm in the Middle. Okay, so it's a little bit of a real-life demonstration of what it looks like when one individual goes inward toward another, and watch for the scaling out of control, okay? Here we go.
Excuse me. I know you didn't think anyone would catch you, but you just slammed your door into my car. The least you can do is say you're sorry, lady. You don't have to take that tone. It's not like I'm hurting your resale value. I'm sorry. See? Like that.
It's a sugar date. What if spring is late and winter it's a marshmallow world? It's the time to play. It's a whipped cream. It's a whole year round. Sun is baked like the pumpkin head. It's shiny so you know it won't freeze. The world is your snowball. See how it grows. Whenever it snows, the world is your snowball just for a song. So get up and roll it along. It's the
You just see it from afar, it just looks silly, right? You just see these two people just going at it. It's like, do they not understand what's going on? So let's think about this for a moment. This is Malcolm's mom, captured in all of her glory right there. If I were to walk up to Malcolm's mom just moments before this were to have taken place and shown her a picture of what her car is about to look like, all crumpled up, mashed up, torn up, and said, this is what your car is going to look like in about 10 minutes, what do you think her response to that would be? Crazy, right? No way, impossible. And then I said, no, you don't understand. You're going to choose to make your car look like this. What would her response to that be? Same thing, right? Nobody in their right mind would do this. And of course, that's kind of the point. When we're in the box, we are not in our right mind. When we're in the box, we crave almost conflict more than we do solutions. We crave conflict more than peace. Problems greater than solution. I mean, it's just a crazy place to be in. Of course, when Malcolm's mom gets back to work or home or wherever she's going, how does her story start regarding the car? The reason we want to get some of those things up is because as we map something out here in a moment, I want you to think about the possibility of this thing existing with each of these relationships and what that might look like. We'll come back to it here in just a second. So let's take a look at this. Map out what just happened in the parking lot there, okay? Let's suppose for a moment that I am in the box. Now again, when I say in the box, that means I've gone inward. I'm thinking primarily of myself. I'm not seeing another individual clearly. I only see them as the person that I dislike, that I'm frustrated with. You see, when I go in the box toward another individual, I begin to see them as a caricature. I begin to see them in a very distorted way. I see them only in the way that I need them to be in order to feel validated. So I begin to see a very narrow version of them. I conveniently discard or ignore anything that would contradict the created person that I'm putting together here. I'm not seeing clearly. I have this need for justification, so I go into this box. So let's just say for a moment I'm in the box toward an individual. In this case, we'll just say Sally. We'll just use a name. Now, Sally could be staff member. Sally could be an individual, the DSO, could be a resource, could be staff, who knows, could be a patient. If I'm seeing Sally as an object, as an obstacle, somebody that's just making my life difficult, it seems like everything they do is just making my life difficult. I'm narrowing little by little to where I only see them as that. If I see Sally as an object rather than a person, all of my interactions begin to communicate the fact that I don't see her as a person, that I see her as an object. You've been on the other side of this. You know what that experience is like. It's resentful. I mean, it just gets frustrating. So if I'm communicating in the way that it carries this accusation and blame to it, or if I'm communicating that I see you as a vehicle, I see you as an obstacle, well, how do people respond to blame typically? What's your experience? They get defensive? A little pushback? Okay. And again, we might not think we're blaming, but our very tone and the way that we're communicating everything is always coming with an element of judgment and frustration, or the fact that we see them as an object. So Sally over here on the other side now has just been given an invitation to go into the box. So she's not seeing me as a person anymore. She's seeing me as an object, somebody who's making her life more difficult. Because she sees me as an object, all the things that she's doing and interacting with me are carrying this same level of communication, blame and accusation. Next thing you know, we just go around and around and around. This is what we call collusion, okay? This is not a true legal definition of collusion. This is ours. It's a kind of an ironic use of the word. A conflict where the parties are inviting the very things that they're complaining about, driven by a need to be justified. Where we actually end up provoking the very thing that frustrates us and annoys us. Is there anything that annoys us about any of our existing staff members? Do we find ourselves in the box? Do we find ourselves in the box? Resource, other doctors, DSO. We can begin to see all these organizations in a very narrow way that validates our frustration. You see, when we're blaming somebody for anything, what we need more than anything is for them to continue to be blameworthy. And so we'll find that justification. Once I've decided that somebody else is to blame for my problem, I am now invested emotionally in that narrative, and I have to continue to see him that way. And so I will grab onto any other validation that I can find to further substantiate that. And what I do is, little by little, I begin to distort my real view of that person or that other organization, because now I'm only seeing the things that validate me and I'm ignoring everything else. We get into this strange zone where we actually end up, again, provoking the very thing that annoys us, creating the very thing that we abhor, all the while blaming everybody else for it. I do this very well. Okay? Now, what I'd like to do is invite you to join me in mapping out a little bit of a collusion on page 5 of your handbook there. I want you to think of one of these relationships. Think of an individual or even an organization. It could be a resource center, or it could be a DSO, whatever you'd like to do. I want you to think of somebody that you find yourself sometimes in the box toward. Okay, you get a little bit frustrated and annoyed with. You find yourself going inward and thinking of you as the victim, or you being frustrated and annoyed by this individual. Just think of an individual or a group that you get in the box toward. And so the first step in this, before we get there, just please write your first name right here between this image and the box. Okay, step 1, just your first name, because you own that side of this. Okay. Everybody needs help? I think you got name cards, or just checking. All right. Next up, step number 2, over in this space, okay, between the image and the triangle here, I want you to write the name of an individual that you sometimes get in the box toward, or an organization that you sometimes get in the box toward, or a peer that you sometimes get in the box toward. Again, this could be the DSO, this could be a vendor, this could be a supplier, this could be a staff member, this could be anybody that you find yourself getting really frustrated with sometimes and going inward toward. Go ahead and write that name right there. Now, if it's a person sitting next to you, please use a code name. Those things are going to get weird fast. All right. Okay. Give you a second to think about that. Everybody get one?
There's also Christy.
So maybe instead of Ed, write Ted. Yeah. You know, something really... All right. Okay. Everybody got something? Yeah. Again, it could be an organization, it could be a level within a hierarchy, anything. All right, very good. Next thing I want you to do, in quadrant 1, which is that triangle there, Think of something that this person or this group or this organization does that really bothers you when you're in the box. Something that you wish they would quit doing. Something that really, it might not bother you when you're out of the box and you're thinking rationally, but sometimes it just really, really irritates us. It could be the way a particular staff member functions, something they do. It could be something from the DSO. We've got a change, one more thing being changed. Something that feels like it's being thrust upon us in some way. It could be a relationship with a vendor. What is it that they do that really annoys you and frustrates you when you're in the box? All right? Give you a second. Just kind of write that in that triangle area right around it there. Now, you're all going to need to do this because we're going to have a little activity here with this in a moment. Okay? All right. I was doing this with a public utility firm a while ago, their executive team, and I asked them to think about this. It was a similar activity. And I said, think of something that bothers you, something that you wish they'd quit doing. One of the individuals in the team said, breathing. I said, oh, wrong workshop. I don't think I can help you there. Pick low-hanging fruit. All right. Ready? Next step, in quadrant 2, when you're in the box toward this person, how do you see them and what they're doing? When we're in that moment where we're frustrated, where we're in the box, we're kind of self-consumed, self-focused, we're really frustrated with that annoying thing that they're doing, how do we see them and what they're doing? Write that into that rectangle there in step 4. When we're really in the box, how do we see them? Not when we're out of the box and in one of our rational modes, when we're in the box. Angry, upset, self-focused, self-concerned. Okay? Next step. Up above here in the triangle, upside down, when you're seeing this person in the ways that you've listed below, here and here, when you're seeing this person in those ways, how do you act towards them? Towards that individual, toward that organization, whoever it might be. How do you act towards them? What kind of things do you do? Do you see how the seeing is leading to the doing? What kind of things do you do? How do you act towards them when you're seeing them that way? Give you a moment. Just keep writing there. Keep thinking of different things. I'm going to pass some things out here. Let's see. Hand those to you. You're going to need one of those each, okay? Maybe once you get done here, they can go back there. I'll hand this to you. Just take one each and just pass them along here. I'm not very good at this. Whoops. You just need one each there in a moment, okay? You just need one each, which is why apparently I'm giving you about 20. R. R. You just need one each, maybe back behind here as well, and then if you could just go down this way, okay? Thank you. All right, now, think of the things that you do when you're seeing them that way. We're in the box. What I'd like to have you do is take that Post-it you've got and kind of just cover up the bottom two shapes. So it looks like this. You notice I've got my name and the other name and the contents below covered up. We don't want to see any of our own writing there for what we're about to do. The only thing that should be visible is what we've written into the upper triangle and a blank upper rectangle. I realize this is sounding tedious here, so I hope I'm making sense. Good? All right. Very good. Okay. Now, Again, the only thing that should be visible is what we wrote into quadrant number 3. All right? So in again, that triangle up there. Now, in a moment, this is what we're going to do. I'm going to invite you to exchange your books with somebody. Not yet. Don't erase anything. Don't cross anything out. I'm watching you. All right. In a moment, we're going to ask you to exchange books with somebody. And this is what we're going to invite you to do. Not yet. Once you get your partner's book sitting in front of you, I want you to look at what they wrote in this upper triangle and ask yourself the following question. If I were in the box and somebody treated me in the ways outlined in quadrant 3, how would I see them? And then I want you to write that into this upper rectangle. Now again, forgive me for, can I borrow your book for just a second? I'm not going to read it. All right. So I take an individual's book here, and I would simply look at what is written into this triangle up here, and then I ask myself, if I were in the box and somebody treated me this way, how would I see this person? And I'm going to write that into this rectangle here. Question number 1 is it possible that the people that I work with see me this way? Is it possible that the person that I'm mentioning in this map sees me this way? And then the next question is this. Does quadrant 4, meaning this rectangle, does it invite more or less of quadrant 1, which is the lower triangle? Does quadrant 4, what's written here, does that invite more or less of what's written here? We're perpetuating the very thing that we're annoyed with. What does that feel like? What does that look like to have that staring back at you?
It's going to be a vicious circle.
It is. You see, this changes things. The moment that I see I have a part in this. This individual that is so frustrating, this organization that's so frustrating and annoying to me, the very behavior that I find most annoying and that I was quickest to identify and write about, I'm actually playing a role in provoking and sustaining. Now, that initially might feel like a ton of bricks and something that we might feel some resistance to, but that's actually a very exciting thing. You see, when we are in the box and we are in the middle of a collusion like this, the thing that we are focused on more is who started it. We have this absolute obsession with who started it, but rarely do we ever pause and ask ourselves, who's sustaining it? Which is an entirely different kind of a question. When I'm in a relationship that is not working as well as it otherwise could be, whether it be with the DSO, resource center, staff, other doctors, patients, and it's not going well, is it possible that I'm sustaining the very thing that I'm complaining about? And it goes back to the very way that I see this individual and the provocations that are flowing from me without me even realizing it. I'll never see my own provocations from within the box because, again, I'm blind. I don't see things. I've lost clarity. I don't see things as they actually are. When I'm in the box, I'm obsessed with and I measure others' impact on me. When I'm outward, I focus on and measure my impact on others. Because ultimately, if I want the organization to be successful, why would I focus anywhere else? Pause and consider for just a moment. Think if I woke up tomorrow and realized that all of the things, the relationships, the organizational difficulties that cause me heartburn and frustration, if I woke up and realized that I actually have a part in sustaining those things, well, initially that might feel horrible. But if we allow ourselves to think about it a little bit more, that's probably one of the most hopeful things that could have possibly popped into our minds. Because the moment that I see that I am part of this, that I am sustaining this, that means I can do something about it. I have it within my control to change the very way that I'm seeing this organization or this other individuals, because the way that I'm seeing them is leading to the flow of behaviors and what I'm communicating to that individual, which is only provoking more of the same problem. And so we're talking about a fundamental shifting in the way that we see other individuals, but at least we can recognize this. Do this. You could think through this with any other relationship that you have. I love the candor this morning as you're talking about some of the conflicts as you're working through and disagreements and the ability to not only recognize those things, but to acknowledge them and discuss them is a sign of a healthy organization. Healthy organizations aren't void of disagreement. They just know what to do with it. They recognize it for what it is, which is a venue to innovate and create. And when an organization can begin to disagree productively, That's a powerful organization. But in order to do that, we've got to take away these collusions and get rid of these things in the very ways that we see other individuals. Okay? In my mind, the way that I'm seeing things, my flawed worldview and the way that I'm seeing this, I believe truly that I am solving the problem, that I'm fixing the problem. You see, what happens is when we get up here to the do part, all we think about is solving problems. We have a lot of problem solvers in the world. We don't have very many problem seers. Ones that actually pause and consider that the very way I see the problem might be part of the problem. That back themselves up from here to here. And allow themselves to consider that I might not be seeing things correctly. Yeah, a lot of these bad things about this organization or this person or this other team might be factual. My list might be factual to some extent. But typically, it's just incomplete. You see, I've allowed myself to ignore anything that would dilute that toxicity or that poison because it doesn't serve my purpose of being validated in the way that I'm choosing to see them. So you're absolutely right. That's the power of this distortion. When I find myself up here, I don't think I'm sustaining a collusion. I just keep trying to solve this problem. You see, from an inward mindset, I see people as the problem. From an outward mindset, I see people with problems. That's a very big difference. If I see them as the problem, my only point, the only thing I can spend time on is fixing them or just getting them to move on. But there's zero curiosity as to what may be creating that problem. The pressures, the headaches, the issues, the constraints, the challenges they're experiencing that I might not be aware of. And some of these things may be systemic within my very own practice, but I'm ignorant of them because I only see people as problems. And so I'm constantly just shifting people in and out and finding somebody, and then they self-sort and they get out because it didn't work, and I end up with turnover. Because people are the problem, rather than people with problems. Now, again, that's an easy thing to say. It sounds like nice consultant speak, but we'll play this out in a moment here, okay? Fantastic. Any other thoughts on that collusion exercise, please?
I've actually spent a lot of time thinking about this. I noticed one of the key components for this is that there's a...
And time constraints can be an invitation to go in the box. Now, we still have to decide whether or not we're going to go in there. I could have 5 minutes with an individual, and time is of the essence, and I can go into survival mode. There's no question. That is an incredibly attractive invitation to go inward because we feel all these pressures. But when we pause and consider the ramifications of us going in the box and beginning to see others as objects, if we at least recognize going in that some of those things might be the outgrowth, it'll at least allow us to pause and perhaps be a little more outward than we otherwise would be. It's not about perfection. It's not as though we're either inward or outward. We're always hopefully shifting a little bit further outward. Could I approach this meeting from a little more outward? Could I try and understand where others are coming from, their headaches, issues, and constraints, to where they feel as though I actually understand them? Can I actually see them as people rather than as problems? Can I make the effort to do that? Because if I continue to see them as problems, I will turn them into problems, and I will amplify it. When we're in a collusion, we're actually saying, I hate it when you talk to me like that or when you behave like that. Please do more. Because we see them in a way that flows back from us and provokes the very behavior that we're complaining about. So the time constraints themselves aren't the inwardness. You're going to have plenty of those situations in life, and there's no question. I do want to point out, you're absolutely right, that when we're in these pressure cooker situations, the invitations to go inward are substantially higher, but all the more reason why somebody remaining outward can have such a profound effect on an organization and a team trying to work through things when the time frame is shortened like that. We'll see what that means in a moment. Here we're just talking about shifting outward. We're not really giving much to it. Please. That's something that we have an initial instinct in some respects, and the problem is sometimes we think that it's what we say that's actually communicating that. Time will tell whether or not what we're saying actually matches with reality, but we can usually have a pretty good sense right up front whether or not the true mindset, the way they're seeing me, jives with what they're saying. When our mindset is outward, when we see people as mattering, we're interested, we're curious about their pressures, headaches, issues, constraints, and I take them into account in the way that I go about doing my job. That's where trust comes from. Trust comes from an organization like that. When you have a trusting organization, a team, and other relationships, you can move fast. You can get things done. It's incredible. Now, in order to do this, in order to, number one, get ourselves out of these collusions and get ourselves out of the box and build this kind of an organization, it requires a particular pattern. We're going to see how we can turn out. This is going to be the mindset change tool that we're going to leave you with. Okay? We'll have a little bit of a discussion about this. And again, I want you to notice the subtitle there, which is Ceasing to Work Against Ourselves. Okay? It was discussed quite a bit this morning from both, a little bit about self-awareness, the importance of seeing ourselves and understanding not just who we are, but how others experience us, how I see other individuals. Because you see, how I see other individuals is truly a reflection of how I see myself. So, I'm going to show you a video. This is Chip Huth. Chip is, he's no longer captain, he's now a major within the Kansas City Police Department. He's going to refer to a time where he was running the SWAT team in Kansas City. Running the SWAT team is a pretty dirty, violent business. A lot of flashbangs and breaking down house doors and serving high-risk warrants and things like that. Okay? You're going to see a little bit of a before and after with Chip as he shifts from this inward way of seeing himself in relation to others and seeing other individuals to seeing himself and moving and shifting more outward. I just want you to see that shift because we're going to implement and utilize one of the tools that Chip used to successfully make this change. Please understand, this doesn't happen overnight. And please don't fall into the trap of just saying, are we inward or outward? Okay, I'm outward. We're always somewhere in between. The question should always be, could we be more outward toward the people that we work with, and what does that look like? We'll get there in just a second. This is the big question to ask yourselves. Do we want our teams, our staff, our practice, our people, do we want them to conform or to excel? If we want them to conform, that's easy. You just have to remind them that you're the boss. Show them the organization chart every once in a while. Remind them who pays them. That's all you have to do. But please keep in mind, that's not leadership, nor is it influence. It's as if you're walking around with a big old bouncer behind you named Biff that's ready to enforce every little thing that you say. And Biff is the equivalent of your title, your role. And that's what's getting people to acquiesce, to go ahead and bend and to conform. Sometimes we want people to excel, but we continue to see them as vehicles and objects. In other words, working absolutely against the very thing that we say that we want to work toward. Chip was a hard worker. Chip wanted to excel. Sometimes we think our success is predicated on our knowledge and our work ethic. That'll only get us so far. See, the problem is that we create all kinds of problems with other individuals, and then we end up putting out fires all the time, and we pride ourselves on our ability to put out fires, forgetting the fact that most of those fires probably started from our own ignorance of what was actually happening, because we just weren't curious enough. Sometimes people will say things, look, if I had a trigger moment like that, I'd shift too. How many times do you think Chip had sat down and chatted with his teenager before that moment, though? Millions of times. The conversations probably ended with, all right, punk teenager, go in the house. Who knows? What was different this time is the level of self-awareness because of what he'd been researching and thinking about. It increased to the level that suddenly he was recognizing triggers that were happening all along. They were always there. We have triggers every day. They're all around us, but our self-awareness is such that we don't recognize them. We don't recognize the actual impact of the choices that we're making to see others as objects or to see ourselves and be focused purely on ourselves. We only see things through the filter of what helps us and what makes us happy and what makes life easy for us. Now, we want to make a very important point here, which is this. This whole shift outward isn't about just getting to where we're happy teams and we're in with baked goods and smiling and kumbaya, wonderful moments like that. That's good. But our goal is to make your lives easier. Our goal is to make you the most productive version of yourself and of your organizations as possible. And this shift is what will allow us to do it. So in order to make that claim, we should be able to point out some key performance indicators. Chip's squad, after the shift had taken place, over the next 3.5 years, they seized more drugs, guns, and money over the next 3.5 years than they did over the previous decade combined. They'd never reached that level of success. Their key performance indicators, productivity went through the roof, increase of over 300%. Now, we could say something, well, but how do we know that wasn't just because they changed the process and now they're knocking heads and excessive use of force or whatever else? Well, to me, this is even more spectacular of what this shift can do for our organizations. Generally speaking, 1996 to 2006 on annual, they had about 36 lawsuits. Now, that was the cost of doing business. As most SWAT teams in large metropolitan areas will tell you, this is within the norm. That resulted in the average cost of lawsuit, $70,000. The annual cost was $2.5 million. Over the 10-year period, $25 million in order to settle or deal with those lawsuits. Since that happened, it's been about 7 or 8 years now. Since that shift happened, the decrease in lawsuits isn't 10, 15, 20, 30%. They haven't had one. Zero. Public information, public record. You cannot get a police force and a SWAT team to increase their productivity by over 300% and get rid of their liabilities without a significant change in the very way that we see things. That's not a system or a process there. That's what happens when we implement the existing systems and processes and the best practices with an outward mindset of seeing others as mattering. If we had more time, there's other videos where you actually have this moment where you see Chip actually engaging with an individual in a quote-unquote drug house. And see how he interacts with that particular individual. And by the way, he gets to his objectives far more quickly as well. It's incredible what happens when you start seeing people as mattering and begin to have some level of curiosity about them. When you have an organization that's frustrating you and you feel like you're a vehicle to them, you feel like they're mandating 1, 2, 3, too many things, pause and consider their outside triangles. What are they dealing with? When you have a staff member that's showing up a little bit late, what's happening? The morale is down. Have I had any curiosity to understand where that's coming from? And by the way, outward mindset does not mean you just make sure everybody's happy and deal with people that are working against your best interests. We just make sure that we're not part of the reason why that behavior is being manifest. And we're usually provoking some of it. So, this pattern that we're going to look at in order to make sure we get out of the box and end these collusions is what we're going to look at now. And it's called the outward mindset pattern as we wrap this up. Turns out that people who are working with an outward mindset exhibit a very particular pattern. This is the pattern we want you to think about as you leave here today. This pattern is used to not only get out of the box and how to end these collusions, it's also used to create true innovation and collaboration within organizations. It's 3 parts. It's pretty simple. In fact, this is on page 6 in your books. We're going to ask you to actually write some things down here. Now, you don't have to write all of this down, but I would recommend at least writing down what the bold words are here. Step number 1 of the outward mindset pattern is to see others. Strive to understand others' needs, objectives, and challenges. This is their outside triangle over here. So peers, manager, reports, whatever those relationships might be in a work environment or a home environment, for that matter. What are their headaches, issues, constraints? What are their objectives? What are they trying to achieve? What are they running into? Do I understand those things? Step number 2 is adjust efforts. Having been curious enough to understand and learn about some of those things, what am I doing with that information? Am I just asking questions so that I seem like the kind of boss that's interested in people? Am I more interested in being seen as being curious or actually being curious? If I'm actually truly curious, I'm going to do something with that information, not just celebrate the fact that my whole staff just saw me being curious. Step number 2 is adjust efforts. Given what I learn about others, adjust my efforts in order to be more helpful. Pause and consider the things that I'm doing. I might realize that some of these challenges and things they're dealing with, I'm actually aggravating those or adding to those things. But I've never known that because I've never expressed a level of curiosity in their outside triangle. This, by the way, is why people leave organizations. You probably know this. They don't quit organizations, they quit bosses, quit coworkers. Oftentimes, again, if I'm seeing the people that work for me as vehicles, I'm not the remote bit curious about their outside triangles. It's their job to understand mine. Because of that, little by little, I'm doing things without even realizing that they're actually getting in their way or making it more difficult for them to do their job because I'm ignorant as the challenges they're facing as they're trying to do their job. Step number 3, measure impact. Measure and hold myself accountable for the impact of my work on others. Just simple. And again, sometimes the most profound things are the simplest. It's actually executing this that allows us to completely transform our organization and reduce the fetters and the constraints that aren't allowing us to be the best version of our organization. Allow that brain power and potential to be amplified and displayed. So we want to show you a video of an organization that made this effort. So this is Andy. So he's Citrix. This is another Arbinger client. He's going to talk about their effort to utilize this pattern. His department was in a collusion or a conflict with another department. Again, think of your practice with the DSO, your team with vendors, your whatever. You're within your own team itself, with staff members, whatever it might be. Andy recognized that we need to end this collusion. So I'm going to use this SAM process and see if we can end the collusion. He says we were crossing swords. Okay, you ever cross swords? So he decided he was going to utilize this system to see if they could remedy that situation. In other words, it wasn't about 4, 5, and 9. It was about this other team feeling as though they were never taken into account. The fact that they felt taken into account and that was acknowledged and understood and they were making an effort, that was the thing that they needed. There's going to be failures and problems along the way. There's going to be those disagreements that Ken was talking about along the way. Don't run away from those, but are we taking each other into account? All right, and then there was one other adjustment that was made in the new rhythm and routine of how things functioned. What did they do? Anybody remember? It was kind of almost a throwaway line. It was a Thursday evening meeting. Do you remember what that meeting was about? Yeah, that was think about that for a moment. I want you to think about the individual or group that you just mapped that collusion out with. And imagine a scenario where you sit down with that individual and simply ask, what problems am I causing for you? And then to sit back and listen without accepting a million invitations to go into the box or get defensive. When we find ourselves getting to that point, that's when innovation and collaboration can take place. Curiosity is what leads to collaboration and innovation. If you want to be more collaborative and innovative, stop talking about collaboration and innovation and get curious. All right, so there were some metrics. What were the metrics that came out of this? Sorry? Okay, so do you remember any of the statistics on that at all? Productivity increase? Okay, so they freed up 500,000 pounds. 500,000 pounds. That was not the intent when Andy went in. They just wanted to get to where they weren't having conflict anymore. And yet as they began to see that, see things clearly, allow things to surface and to begin to deal with reality for the first time, they ended up freeing up all kinds of money that was being wasted and spent in all kinds of other places. There was another metric. Do you remember the other one? Okay, so yeah, that 500,000 pounds in freed up resource had nothing to do with employment. It was just right there. They were able to pull that right out without any new employees or anything else. There was another metric. Okay. Isn't that a great acronym? CRUDS? Sounds like a Disney villain. We're next to Disney World here, right? Customer raised unique defects. They dropped through the floor, fundamentally changed the gradient of the graph. Certainly you measure problems and mistakes within your practice and within your teams. What would that be like if those fundamentally dropped 50, 60, 70%? Would that be a good thing? Listen, think about it this way. Andy's team, by simply choosing to exercise SAM, ended up saving 500,000 pounds. Pause and consider this. What was their inward mindset costing them financially? 500,000 pounds. The only thing that changed was the mindset shift that allowed them to get curious and begin to adjust efforts. And once that took place, suddenly they saw all kinds of wastes, all kinds of problems and issues. They were able to eradicate them. There's an enormous power in beginning to see people as people. As we wrap this up, my hope, as you take this away, again in this kind of limited and condensed version here, is that you pause and consider every time you've got a conflict or a problem and you're feeling frustrated toward another individual and you feel absolutely certain that you know who's to blame. Recognize that you're in the box. You're going there. You're not seeing things clearly. You're seeing things in a way that absolve you of responsibility and place the blame squarely at somebody else. And in some respects, that is the height of playing a victim card. There's true victimhood in the world. It shouldn't be in those settings. We're really saying all the problems and solutions are outside of my reach. When we're blaming somebody else 100% for something, we're simply saying, my action plan to hopefully resolve this is for them to wake up one morning and realize they've been wrong all along and apologize to me. That's my plan. It sounds pretty silly when we say it out loud. The other option is to pause and consider my part in things. Change the way that I see them by getting curious about them. Change the very way that I see it. And as you walk away, you've got an incredible organization here, a North American Dental Group, that is invested. Again, it was interesting in my first initial conversations with you to feel that, but then to come and see that validated in spades, to see the level of interest they have in you as individuals, in your people as individuals, and in this almost family type of a situation. Never forget to focus on the soil. They provide all kinds of strategic tools and methods and approaches and systems and processes. Never forget to ask yourself, am I planting those things in toxic soil? Or am I actually doing my job to increase the fertility of the soil? I know that as you do that, you'll see a tremendous amount of success, and you'll see wastes disappear that you never even recognized were waste before.